Hey everyone, this is Joe from BitBang, and this video is about the TKO and the overview about it, basically how it works, where it came from, where it's going, and where we are now. So this whole series will be a bunch of videos on how to use it. So it'll be a playlist on YouTube. So after this video, there'll be a bunch more videos coming out, maybe a dozen or so about installation, the features, and then any updates from there on after about feature functionality. So where did it all start? It started with the double KO board. This was a board that we were working on with the very ambitious goal of doing every single controller protocol for every console, including retro. So if you look here, it has a port here meant for all the retro consoles and a USB port for all the USB consoles. And not too sure what date this was made in. This one here was made in January of 2021. It worked okay. It did the NES, the SNES, Sega Genesis, Sega Saturn. It did pretty much all the retro consoles you can think of. But there were a little bit of problems with this one, and we weren't satisfied with this quite yet, so we just continued prototyping. And the next board that came out after that, and when I say came out, I mean prototyped, was Nostalgia board. Basically, same as the last board, but the idea was to get all of the retro consoles on here with maybe one USB console protocol, like X input. This one here was made in August of 2021. This worked pretty well, and we weren't too sure how to make the retro cables, so we put this on hold as well for that reason. And finally, we had the 0KO board. This one here was made in October of 2021, and we were planning to go to market with this board with just USB protocols that were not encrypted, like X input, D input, generic keyboards, things like that. We also had PS2 here, and we had an option for another version of this board to do GameCube and N64, and we actually had a lot of pre-orders for this. It was pretty popular. The problem is, though, when we were about to release this chip right here, it's an STM32 microcontroller. It got through a lot of COVID supply chain problems. It was like 10,000 units one day, and the next day there was none. So that began the Chipmageddon, I guess you would call it, right? We couldn't find these anywhere. So we had to cancel all the pre-orders, return everyone's money, and pretty much call it quits for a while to figure out what to do. And as an added note, we did actually manage to supply, or rather secure, some of these chips, about 100 of them, to at least get through the pre-order initially. But when we built some of these units up, these were either counterfeit or B stock of this chip, and they would crash within the next, let's say, 10 minutes to an hour. It was so unreliable with all the tests that we just couldn't release it. We don't want to release any kind of garbage. We always make sure we test everything, so we had to definitely put that on pause. So what did we do? Well, we couldn't really do anything. So all that code that I made on this chip definitely took me 8 to 10 months to make, maybe even a little more with all the testing. So the only two chips in the market that were available, reliably available, I should say, were these two. One's pretty familiar. I think this is an early version of the Raspberry Pi Pico, the RP, I think it's 2040. That's that chip right here. You've probably seen this on other boards. Let's see if I can get this focused a little more. There we go. So it's pretty familiar. It's an earlier version of this chip. There was this one, and then there was the ESP32 S3 series that came out just that year. I think it came out maybe end of 2022 or beginning of 2023, one of those times. In the end, I wound up choosing this one. I just felt like it was more powerful. It had a better form factor, even though this has almost everything this has. This has dual core, so does this, but it has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi into it, so I need to use it, which actually came in handy for all the app products that we made. So in the end, we just ditched this and we went with this. So after I chose it, I went on to porting all of the code, because it didn't affect just the 0 KO. It affected everything else that we made. So it affected the magicians and it affected the antagonist. So I went ahead and ported all that code to this module or this chip, whatever you want to call it, and it seemed to work okay. The magicians did pretty well, sort of the antagonist, and it seemed very stable and reliable. And the entire time, during the entire supply chain crisis, the ESP32 S3 did not go out of stock, and they're very, very well stocked and pretty well supported. So I'm pretty happy with them. That made us, or pushed us, to maybe try it out with the ZKO and convert it over. And that's how this came to be. This was going to be, I guess, the ZKO V2, or the reincarnation of it. In the end, we called it TKO, or technical KO, because we just felt like there was just so many things that went wrong with the ZKO that were out of our control. We just kind of wanted to be superstitious and just not use that name anymore. So now it's called the TKO. And this is the prototype board for it. And as you can see, it has the magician symbol, the antagonist symbol. It has this other symbol, like a old party hat. That's the Fiesta RGB controller code that we made. And this one here is prototyped in September of 2023. And it's been working pretty well. It's working so well that we're making all these video series, and we have it on pre-order. And we're just gonna go give a quick overview demo of what this board is doing for us. And to be clear, this is the ESP32 S3. The actual USB code is in a very small STM32 in here. I'll get into the details later on. So there's a lot of things going on under the hood, and we'll get to that. So basically, whether it's covered in this video or in a future video, it's going to be on this playlist, and all the details that you could ever want to know will be covered. So don't you worry about that. So we're going to start out by plugging in our USB cable. The other end is connected to a PC. It's going to be on gamepadtester.com. I'm going to go ahead and navigate there real quick. Okay, there it is. You can't see it, but it's more for easy viewing for me when I'm doing the video. So I'm going to go plug it in. And I'm sure you could hear that in the video. It gave one that Windows recognition for a USB device. You don't see any lights on or anything. I have them turned off by default. But since it's powered, we are now able to connect to the board inside of the stick and configure all of its settings. So if I go to this tablet, and mind you, this is a very slow tablet. It's maybe $80 brand new, but it still works pretty well on this app. And it's a good test, because if your device is very slow, maybe not as powerful as a current gen smartphone, it still can get you around. So you could even use an old smartphone lying around and you'll still do just fine. So we're going to open up the Technical KO, or TKO app. And the first thing you'll see is it's starting to check for things on the internet. You don't have to be on the internet to use this app, but if you are connected, it'll check for the latest versions, for example, the latest app version or latest firmware versions, and it'll tell you inside the app. And then this menu comes up for connection. And after it's done checking all the versions online, you can go ahead and scan for the TKO. So you'll see it scanning. And it should take maybe 10 seconds or less. And you'll see it'll say, I found one, and this is the only one in the area. If there's more, it'll show you a bunch more, or it'll tell you a bunch more, then you can scroll through the list. So you say, choose your device. And you'll see here's your TKO. Just like the magicians and the antagonist, they all have a unique name. So no one else in the world can have the same serial number as what you have. They can connect to it, but they can't really do much anything else. So we're going to go ahead and choose it. We're going to connect to it. And you'll see it try to connect. And it did connect. And now you're able to enter the TKO. If you want to disconnect from it and try another TKO or another device, you can hit disconnect here. Sometimes Bluetooth will glitch. It'll say can't find it. And that's not a big deal. It just means that something happened with the communication. A packet got lost, it got dropped, something happened. You just can hit retry or scan again or whatever, and it'll find it again. Of course, if you accidentally unpowered it, then it won't find it. So we're gonna go ahead and enter. And you'll see here's the main menu. It's loading it up. It's a little loading icon there. And here are all the modules or all the menus, right? We have the Magicians, the Antagonist, the Fiesta RGB, that's the RGB LED controller, all the consoles, the BLE mode. If you're familiar with the V2 Antagonist and Magicians, that's just how it advertises when it's powered on, the device info, and the test dashboard. And again, I'm going to go into each menus in detail, but I'm just going to show you a very brief overview of each one just to kind of get you seeing a preview of what's to come. So if you go into Magicians, those who have the Magicians V2, it's the same exact menu, right? Of course, it won't matter for this because it's a stick. It's not an all button controller or leverless or a hitbox product. You can choose the X-axis here for your cleaning mode, left, right, last input, or no cleaning at all, and same for the Y-axis. Just like the V2 Magicians, you can go ahead and make your own rules. You can choose custom mode, you can choose profiles, so it's all the same. And you'll find out through the entire app, you'll have these info buttons, and it'll tell you what this menu is doing for you, what it can do, what it can't do, just in case you just don't feel like reading the manual. Okay, so you can go back with main here, and same thing here with the Antagonist. Very similar to Magician's menu, but not as much configurability because it's a simpler product, even though it's very special. You can choose your type of charge character, whether it's kicks or booms or punch buttons. You can have it as a jump button for your Antagonist button, or you can disable it. Okay, and again, even if you have it enabled without the Antagonist button here, if you're familiar with the Antagonist product, it won't do anything. So having the cleaner for SOCD enabled and the Antagonist enabled won't do anything. It won't introduce any kind of crazy lag. Yeah, it does do some processing, but it's so small that it's much less than a frame. Here's the Fiesta RGB. Here's the menu for it. I still have some functionality that I'm working on, but right now I have just patterns. I'm going to go into more detail in another video, but just to give you a preview, you can just go ahead and just choose your pattern here. You can go through a bunch of patterns, right? Right now I only have 4, but every time I work on this, I'll keep making a new pattern, maybe every few weeks, maybe a few months, or maybe depending on who wants to offer an idea for a pattern. So it's pretty simple. Just choose it and it'll animate it. It's pretty fast. Even this slow tablet will go ahead and change the settings pretty quickly on the stick. Okay, so we'll leave it on fire. I actually personally like the fire one the most. I like the way it looks out. It actually it looks pretty cool in video, but it looks even better in person. You can hit back here, and one thing that we're pretty proud of is the layout. So this is an 8-button layout. When you're first installing it, you can press 8 button, and these will render accordingly. So let's say you hit 6 button, it'll go with 6 button. And if you'll notice, these actually stopped animating because it's 6 buttons. But now they're animated again. You can choose all this too, and as it's doing it, it'll even tell you how to wire it. So if you're familiar with those little RGB LEDs, those little satellites that go on those Sandwalk buttons, you can go ahead and just follow from TKO and then daisy chain it from how we have it configured. So if you deviate from the wire order, it's not going to work. Just again, this is a way to avoid the manual and just make it as easy as possible to get up and running. And I'm going to go back. So that's the RGB controller. Here's the consoles. Right now it's on Nintendo Switch. Right now this only supports X input, D input, generic. That's like your generic gamepad for Windows, which is neither D input or X input. It's kind of weird, but it has like a bunch of buttons. Switch, and it does PS3. PS3 won't work on the PC, but it'll work on PS3, right? And again, if you need to know exactly what this menu does, you can go to info and just read about what's going on here. As time goes on, we're going to keep adding on consoles. Mind you, it's not going to work for encrypted consoles. I can't see it working for encrypted consoles. I have to make a new version for this for a board, like a V2 or a whole different thing, or maybe just convert the WK over and rekindle this project. And I think it will. get rekindled, since this is working really well. And yes, that's pretty much it there. Okay, and just to show you real quick, if I want to switch, I just press this, and you'll hear it disconnected, and it reconnected to X input. You can't see it on the computer, but you can hear it, right? If I hit D input, it disconnects, reconnects, again here, disconnects, reconnects. So there's no auto negotiation, but this is a nice way to get around it. BLE mode, I'll get into more details, but it just basically configures how this whole thing advertises Bluetooth when you're walking around in a tournament or at home. This is the device info, just it tells you what you're connected to, what version you're on. It's kind of it's not really an irrelevant page, but it's just nice to have, because in the main menu, it'll actually tell you if you're out of date, and then you can go ahead and follow another YouTube video through a link. And this is where you can access the manual if you want to read it. Okay, and then you finally have the test dashboard. This is pretty similar to the Magician's V2 and the Antagonist V2. You can see what's going on input-wise. Here it tells you your player LEDs, values, what it is for Nintendo Switch. It tells you what Antagonist mode you're on. It tells you what Magician's mode you're on, what console you're on, and we were on Switch last time. If we go back, for example, and we try, let's say, generic, and we go back, right, it'll tell you you're on generic. So it just tells you what you're on and when you plug it in, right? So if you go ahead and look here, right, DP is selected, meaning it's just going to be the directional pad, the D-pad. You can't see it here on this AFS 16-inch case, but I have 3 buttons up here, and I have 3 buttons up here. Up here is the lock switch, I think. Is this the lock switch or the stick mode? Let's see. That's the stick mode. So if you see that, it automatically updated. Now, again, this tablet is slow, so it takes about 2 seconds to update. And that's not because it's laggy controller for the game. It just means the Bluetooth connection is slow between the tablet. If you use your own smartphone, like a current gen or a later gen one, it's pretty fast within 1 second. It's not meant to see how fast your inputs are. It just helps you check to see if things are correct. So if you wire this backwards and you try to press it, you'll know immediately. So I'm gonna put the RS mode here, and there it is, right? Same thing here. If you press, 1P, it'll eventually show 1P. There's 1P. If I show, like, let's say 1K to 3K, there it is there. So it at least tells you that your button mapping is correct. You'll notice it's separated in 2 kind of sections here. Modifiers and action. Action just means that it's going to the game, it'll recognize it. Modifiers just means that it's going to change behavior. Everyone's pretty familiar with the ALS, DP, and RS modifiers. Antagonist players will understand the antagonist button as a modifier. Lock is not really a modifier, it's this strange kind of breaking ground electrical wiring. I just put our own lock port on there, and the TB key, the turbo key. One thing I haven't seen often, or actually not at all, is the shift button. So if you hold, shift here, right, at shift, and then you press, let's say 1P, right, it'll show you shift and 1P, which is fine, but when you go look in the game, it actually presses start. So even though you press 1K, 2K, 3K, it'll do what you expect. If you do shift 1K, it's gonna be start, shift 2K, it'll be select, shift 3K, it'll be home. It depends on the protocol you're on also. And again, a future video will go into more detail. But if you understand this much, it's pretty much the gist of it, without going too much more detail. And that's pretty much it. Again, info button here to check out what's going on. It tells you what it can or can't do. And that should be the last menu. Yeah, that's the last menu. The hardware itself, if you look here, this is the ESP32. You never have to pop this off. at all, but just to show you real quick, comes off. When you buy it, it'll actually be together. You'll never have to touch it. Here's the underlying circuitry for it, but it's pretty familiar to other boards you see in the market. It has a USB port. It has this header for USB. Here you can actually plug in your Odin, like that leverless keyboard attachment. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, the Odin. It's really nice quality. You can plug in the illumination here and the directional buttons here, so you don't got to mess with anything else on the headers. It's got the RGB header here that's connected to this and daisy chains across all the LEDs. It's got your familiar turbo button key port and your turbo LED port. Although it's not being used here, it's still available. Touchpad key L3 and R3. Your plate LEDs, your 20-pin header, your stick mode port, your lock port, and this is a I'm gonna call it an auxiliary port. I'm not sure what to call it yet, but it's basically just a generic communication port. I had it on the double KO. It was bigger, and the idea was to have things like screens or retro ports or any kind of attachment, maybe like optical levers. It's just there just so it was accessible to anybody. So I put it on here. I took one pin off, but it's there for future expansion. And I think one of the first things I'll put is going to be like a retro port. So I'm going to take all the code from here and port it over to its own little board. You'll plug it into this. You'll put it to maybe a hole in here, and I'll give you a port accessory for it. That's the plan anyway, and then it'll go from there. So it's pretty standard as far as headers goes, except for the lock port, the communication, the Odin, and the RGB. So I guess it's not that standard, but it's got all the standard fixings as well as other stuff. And that's pretty much it. You could ask any questions down in the comments. I'll answer them, even though it'll probably be answered in a future video. Don't hesitate to ask. You could also go on Discord and ask. But if you think this is something you're interested in, I do have the pre-order page open. It'll be in the description of the video below. If you're still waiting to see more before you jump in for a pre-order, that's fine too. Just go ahead and watch the videos. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.